Hi, I thought maybe it's time that you and I had a little cuppa together. So we would say a cuppa often for tea, but it could be coffee, it could be hot chocolate, it could be a chai latte, it could be any number of different things. Here is the cuppa. I thought you would enjoy the cuppa just as much as I'm enjoying the cuppa. So I just thought I'd quickly show you how we're going to make it. So this is going to be a pattern on my website that you can go in and download. There is no charge. So I've got everything ready for the backgrounds and the bits here in your pattern. That when you download it, it will tell you what sizes to cut and things like that. So this is the main background. Then there's a narrow border. Then there's a wider border. And then there's some binding. And then there's some applique shape. So I've already gone ahead and cut everything out, including my applique. I've got fusible web on the back. So I've fused it onto the fabric with the drawings on it, and I've cut them all out. And I've just got to iron everything in place now. But first of all, I'm going to make the quilt first. There's also batting and backing, so I've already cut those out as well. So we're going to make the whole quilt, we're going to quilt it, we're going to even bind it before we put any applique on it. How bizarre is that? So I'm going to go ahead now. I think you can see everything here. We've got a narrow border. I always like to put the sides on first, then the top and the bottom. So then if you're doing multiple borders, you do the sides, top and bottom, sides, top and bottom, and you can get into a bit of a flow and you know where you're going. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my first round of borders on. You do the whole round first before you start putting the second one on. Nothing hard about this. I've got a regular 50 weight cotton thread. I've got a 1/4 inch foot on. I really can't think of anything else. I've got a normal stitch length, and I'm just going to go ahead now and stitch these borders on. So I'll show you how I'm getting on. So I've got my first border on. So exciting already. I'm using some very delicious fabrics. These are actually batiks. They don't look a lot like batiks, but they're by Hoffman Fabrics, which is always a good thing. I love batiks, so it just seemed to work for me. But you could use any fabrics at all for this. So I'm ready now with that first border on. I'm ready to start with the second border. So I'm going to go ahead and keep sewing my borders on so that I can show you each stage of the way. So I've got my second border all on. I'm pressing the seams each time into the next border. So it's just nice and straightforward. So we're doing pretty well. We've got it so far. Like that. Looking good. Oh, we need that cuppa though. I just thought with me being here and you being there, and we can't always get together, that we'd like to share a cuppa. So we're going to do it this way. So I'm going to layer it now with the batting and the backing, and then we're going to get some quilting on it so that everything is done before we do the applique this time. And I just thought with something small like that, like this, you can do it that way. You can't necessarily on a larger quilt, although there's no reason why you can't. If you've got applique going over the top of things on a quilt, you can certainly have everything ready and then put the applique on later. And then you're just stitching through with your applique through all layers. So it can form part of the quilting, or it can just be some extra stitching on a quilt. I have done many quilts where I have done that sort of thing. So now I'm using a cotton batting here, just a lightweight cotton, and because everything else is cotton, it kind of grips to itself. So I'm just ironing it together. You may want to pop some basting in or some pins, however it is that you like to hold things together. I may just put a couple of pins in. It doesn't really need very much, but I don't want it moving, and I'm going to quilt it next. So I'm going to just do some straight lines. I'm not quilting the center area, apart from I'm just going to come around inside the narrow border there. Otherwise I'm just going to quilt in the narrow border and then a line of stitching fairly close, maybe 1/4 inch away from the seam line, and I think that would be probably enough to hold it. Now I'm not quilting in the middle, so I might just pop a pin in the center there as well, just to hold it still. That's where the applique is going to go. So I'm going to start off going around the outside border here, and stitch on here. So I'm just going to lengthen my stitch just a touch. I just like it to be, instead of the 2.5, I'm just going to take it up to maybe 3. So just a slightly longer stitch. This machine has a dual feed, so I've got that in place. That helps with the quilting. That works much the same way as a walking foot, so if you have a walking foot, that's a good idea. So I'm just going to come around the outside just 1/4 inch away, so I'm using my 1/4 inch foot to line up with my seam. And so I'm just going to come all the way around this border doing that. So I've done the first line of quilting around in the outside border. I'm going to come in now and do one inside the inside border onto the background. So again, I'm going to do the 1/4 inch away from the seam, but inside this time. So I've done my line of stitching around inside the background. I'm just going to do one more line. This time I'm going to go just 1/8 of an inch away in this narrow border, but near the outside border. So on the foot, I'm just going to line up with the inside on this foot is open here, and if you put the inside of the front piece where you want to line up with here, it'll stitch 1/8 of an inch away. How amazing is that? So I've done all the quilting that I'm going to do at the moment. There's probably a little bit more that I might do a bit later. So I've got my 3 lines of quilting there. It's only a small piece. I'm just going to trim it up now and then put the binding on. So I've just got a ruler that's long enough. If you can manage with one, my regular ruler isn't as long, and I could use that. But if you have a longer ruler, it's probably better when you're trimming up longer things, because you can see everything all at once so that everything lines up. So I'm just trimming to fit the quilt top. Oops, mostly. So that's all ready now, and I'm going to machine my binding on. So I've got my binding strips ready. I've joined them up already, and I like to use a diagonal seam when I do my binding. Because I'm going to be machining it, I'm going to stitch it onto the back first. So I folded in a little point here. There is another video on the binding, which there's a link to in the pattern. And then I'm just going to stitch a little bit first, and then I'm going to stop and then bring the rest of it in so that I can just leave a little flap opening for when the other end comes in, and I can tuck that in. So I'll just start this off first. So I'm just sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, so I've still got that 1/4 inch foot on, and I probably need to just bring back to a regular stitch size. Yep. So I've just got that little corner folded down, and I'm just stitching to the end of that. And then I'm just going to bring the other edge over, and then leave probably a 2 to 3 inch gap, and then start sewing with it folded over. And then just add the binding as usual, and I'll show you when I get back to the other end. So I'm just coming round the last corner, and I'm about to tuck into my little bit that I started off with. So that's sitting here open. I just need to trim off any excess now, but just leave enough so that, can you see all this? So that you can tuck it in. So I'm just going to trim it off there. And then I'm just going to pop that inside that fold. And just make sure that everything's sitting nicely here. We can trim this little bit that's sticking out of, that's fine, because it's sitting in there. Just continue on down. And so that's our binding on, and I'm just going to trim off that little bit that's sitting out there so that it's not in our way when we turn the binding over. And now I'm ready, because I'm machining it down on the front, to turn it over now and just come around and stitch all that down. And so that little bit where we've tucked that in to join it, that just rolls over and you don't even notice it, or you could come and hand slip stitch that bit if you wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead now and stitch my binding down onto the front. So I'm just stitching very close to the folded edge there. So I've finished all the binding. This is a great little quilt. Already now it's just a nice little quilt. It's a nice something. It looks pretty good on the back. But I think it just needs, in the border, I think I just need one more line of sewing. On the one here that's up on the wall here, I've done an extra line of quilting in the main border there. So, and I did that one just the same. I'm going to do it now. I found that it was easier when the binding's on, then I know how far the distance is, so I can just judge something that's about halfway. Now you could measure it and mark it, or you can do what I'm doing and you can just do a little eyeball and just come up the middle. So when you sit it in the machine, quite often it helps the fact that it's sitting, and you can just make a rough estimate that it's equal either side of your foot. And that's what I'll be doing this time. I've set the machine to the slightly longer stitch again, and I'm just going to come all the way around halfway between this row of stitching and the binding. So I've finished doing all my quilting. It's looking good. I'm going to start putting the applique on now. So the pattern will tell you also, but we're going to be positioning it so there's a mark. The pattern will have a little note about where we're going to position it, or how high up to come to position the cup. And the pieces on the pattern are all numbered. So in actual fact, number 1 is the handle, and that's because it's just the lower part of it just sits under the actual main part of the cup. So you put piece 1 down first and then 2, etc., because they go in layers like that. And if you know that number 1 is going down first, it always helps. So I've made just a very soft pencil mark where I want to put the base of my cup coming up from that lower edge there, and I'm going to have a little look before I iron anything in place. I'm just going to have a little look at how it's all sitting. Make sure things look reasonably central. I've got these pieces here. I'm just going to check everything before I iron anything. I always like to be absolutely sure. Little decorative bands on the cup. It's looking like a good cup. Looking forward to sharing it with you. Love to see any pictures of any of these that you make. These would be a great little gift. They might be something that you could give to somebody with a nice pack of maybe even some homemade cookies, or maybe not homemade. Maybe with some nice coffee or tea or a hot chocolate, or lots of different things like that. So I've just roughly positioned them at the moment, and then there's all these swirly things which I'm going to do as free motion stitching. I'm also going to free motion stitch around my applique just close to the edge on top of the applique. You could do anything that you prefer in the way of applique. You might like to do a blanket stitch, or you might like to do just a regular straight stitch, or you might want to do a zigzag stitch. You might want to hand applique it. There's lots of different ways, but to do this sort of applique that I'm doing, because I'm using batik cloth has a slightly firmer weave than other cotton fabrics, so it doesn't fray as much, and because it's got the fusible as well, everything kind of sits where you put it and it stitches nicely like that. I do a lot of my applique like that. So I'm going to go ahead, everything's looking pretty good, but I'm just going to take the 2 stripes and that off, and I'm going to iron my cup and my handle in place. So the cup handle should look as if it's attached to the cup here and should just sit under down there. Sometimes when you make a quilt you might want to throw some stars or hearts or something on afterwards, and you can easily do that with this same sort of applique, so that you have got all your quilting in the quilt completely made, and then you might decide, well, it just needs a little something else. So I'm just going to position that little cup band. So I'll position and iron everything in place first, and then I'll go and do the stitching, and then I'll do the steam stitching as a separate little exercise, because that all needs to be marked as well. And then we've got the nice froth on top. This looks like it's a frothy drink. I do like the froth on top. So everything's in place now, so I can go to the machine. I've set my machine up, it's set for free motion, so I've got my little open toe free motion foot on. I've dropped my feed teeth. Other than that, there's not a lot else to do except stitch it. So I'm going to go ahead and free motion stitch, as I said, just sitting on top of the applique. So I'm going to start just up here near the froth and come all the way around the cup. So I'm going to come down here, go past where the handle's underneath, but then I'm just going to come onto the handle and go around that. So just take your time. As I said, you could do other types of applique stitching, but this is what I'm doing. I'm using the grey thread that I've been using for the piecing and quilting as well. It's not super dark, but it'll just help outline everything. So doing this, you can come do the whole handle all in one go like that. And so this is also quilting this area for us. So we're quilting and we're appliquing. So I guess we're really just quacklicaing. It's a funny word, isn't it? And I'm going to keep coming around the foot, and then I'll start up the other side and show you how I do the bands. So I'm onto the little yellow band here now. So I'm just going to go past it and then back onto it, and then I'll come across, because all the raw edges need to be stitched. And then I'll come back down that side, and then I'll come along again. And I'll do the bigger one in exactly the same way. So I'll continue on, and then I'll show you how to put all the steam on top. So I've gone ahead, I've finished doing all the applique stitching around the cup and the froth on top. Now we've just got to do the little swirly steam coming up from the top. So one thing you could have done was trace it before we put this all together from the pattern. But quite often I like to just do it. I might make it up as I go, but if you need it drawn on, that's fine. Another way would be to mark it this way. So because everything was turned round back to front for the applique tracing, the steam is also back to front. So you can fold the pattern over and just lay it near enough to along the top of the froth there, and then you could just mark just very lightly with a pencil, because you don't want to leave big lines, or it could be a washout marking pen or something, and you could just mark the points where they're coming into, and then you can just roughly draw some swirls. Or if that seems a little bit daunting, you could still come back in, you could mark the little centres just by folding the paper each time, marking some little places, marking the top of things, just some little tiny markers just to give you a little bit of a guide. So I've already gone ahead, not sure if you can see it because I've drawn it quite faintly just with a pencil, just some lines that are fairly similar to the pattern there, but not identical, because steam never does the same thing twice. Well, I don't know if that's a fact, it sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead now and free motion stitch those. So I'm going to do them up and then come back again, starting, well, it wouldn't really matter which end you start if you want to start from the swirl, but I find it's easier to come out from the froth and come up, do the swirl and come back again. When I come back, I'm not trying to stay on the same line. I'm not sure if you can see this one up here, but it's kind of like double line stitching, and again slightly wonky. The idea is it's just a little bit all over the place, like the steam. So I'm just going to start on this end one here, and I'll just do a couple of stitches to lock it off, and then I can just start stitching that up there, just following roughly my very faint pencil. less at the centre of my swirl now, so I'm going to come back now. And as I said, I'm not trying to stay on line, I'm just coming somewhere close. And you might want to wiggle it around. This is kind of fun to do. And then a couple of stitches to lock it again. And there's swirl number 1 done already. Then I'm going to come up again on the next one. This is huge fun to do this sort of thing. Let's pull that piece of thread out of the way. Oops. And then so I'm in the centre again, and I'm just going to come back out again. Just staying close to that line, but not on it every time. So I'll keep going and do the rest of them. I think you can probably get the hang of how that's going, and I'll show it to you when it's all finished. So here we have our nice hot cuppa something. So thank you so much for having a cuppa with me. Please have a cuppa on me by taking the pattern if you'd like to from my website, from GourmetQuilter.com. Please be considerate with it. It is not intended that you take it and make lots of things to sell from it. However, you're most welcome to use it and share it with your friends. So thank you so much for being with me. That's our cuppa. You can't be here and I can't be there, but we can still have a cuppa together, and I think that's such a good thing about quilting. We're such good friendly people that we actually, if we were there, we could have a cuppa together. So there's the cuppa. Please enjoy it. As I said, it would be a very nice little gift wrapped up with some chocolate perhaps, or some coffee, or let me think, muffins. It just goes on and on and on. Thank you so much. Please go to GourmetQuilter.com if you'd like to receive the pattern.